How we doing? So, part two of the little video series just on trying to explain a little bit more about how everything sort of fits together when we're trying to look at stress fractures, what's causing them, what we can do to help them, and those sorts of things. Okay, so where we're going to start today is just looking. There was a study done by a few ECB guys, Pete Orway and Paul Felton and a few others, and they were looking at causes of stress fractures. And the big thing they found out was that the degree of the angle of the hip and the knee at the back foot contact was a big predictor of those who would go on to get an injury. So the higher the angle, the greater chance they had of getting a stress fracture. Obviously that's not saying they're definitely going to get it, but that was what they found from their study. Now this is important to understand and not just take it in isolation. But this is where understanding the work that Steph's done comes into it massively. You know, so for me, for someone who came from a predominantly S&C sports therapy background who wanted to help injuries, this is massive. Understanding this when you put the two together. Because then what we see is obviously understanding that so we're thinking about the higher the angles are, and then we look at Steph's hip or knee dom. Now again, like I said in the first video, so important for this for so many reasons. This classification and understanding, and not thinking one's right and one's wrong, because they're not. You know, as Steph says himself, it's not about the best or the worst, it's what's right for you, but then understanding that and going with it. So when you look at that, we know then that the higher the angles at knee and the hip are going to be on the knee dom. Okay, we know that. So that means the hip dom should, in theory, steer or find it easier to steer clear of injuries. But again, we need to be training them right, and we'll come on to that a little bit later. So with the knee DOMs, first off, we need to understand the difference. Obviously, you should understand the difference. So back foot contact, if your leg bends a lot, your knee DOM, if it doesn't bend as much, still have a little bit bend, you're more hip DOM. Okay, so that's the main difference. So again, we're looking at the angle. So what we knew anyway was that, or just by anecdotally, you see more knee DOMs getting a stress fracture. And that's when we go back to a couple of things. Now, one of them is this, having the heel up at back foot contact. Because if the heel's down, that makes the pre-turn, again, something which Steph is wrote extensively on, he brought this in, understood the concept of it and brought it to everyone else. When we understand that, we understand then what plays in to the pelvis and the thoracic, what we spoke about on the last video. How once we land at back foot contact, if the foot is heavily down and then we're not getting the pelvis through, we're not getting hip shoulder separation, the pelvis isn't square at ball release and front foot contact, and then we're going lateral flexion, and then we're into the stress fracture. So it's easy to sort of think, okay, we've got a high incidence of, if the angle's high at back foot contact on your back leg, you could have a stress fracture. But then if we then look for those who have got quite a high angle, if they have got heel up, good pre-turn, in a good position at the pelvis, front foot contact, the ball release, we know then they're going to be safer because they've not got that massive lateral flexion. So it's important to understand that, not just think because of this, you're definitely going to get a stress fracture. No, that's why we need to understand, like I said, the way the hips and the pelvis are, what like goes into that. So pre-turn is the heel up, and then we come along, and then we're looking at training. So when we talk about training, again, it's important with the hip and knee DOM to know what you are, because what we've seen is classic sort of hip DOMs with poor training, with knee DOM drills, squats, lunges, Bulgarians, can then revert back. The action actually changes from being a hip DOM into a knee DOM. And the thing is, when we're doing this, obviously the back foot contact isn't where it was. And then instead of being, so you might have a real springy back foot contact, nice and strong getting through, suddenly it's slow. And when it's slow and the heel's stuck, we're not getting the pelvis through, then we're getting the same thing for a hip DOM. The angle increases, and they don't understand it because their body before was a hip DOM and everything was pretty good and facing forward and everything was going well. Suddenly, from poor training, which most people do, they're actually exposing themselves from a decent place to suddenly being at risk of distressy. Okay, so it's really important to understand, not just think it's the angle, as soon as you've got that angle, bang. No, because we've seen people with quite a high angle at back foot contact who can pre-turn well, say get the pelvis and the thoracic in the right place, and then you haven't got that high degree of when the red zone really think you're going to be at risk of the stress fracture. But some of the different things come in here is not just to think we don't do these. Some of these we can get some really good stuff from. From like squats, you can do different squats, squatting from the pins for explosiveness and things like that. So it's not just saying these exercises are bad. We have to put them in context of where we want to do them. There's all sorts of different lunges we can do if you're a hip dom as well. Bulgarians, isometrics. So we're talking about tempo and type. So we're doing isometrics, we're doing eccentric work, those sorts of things. Are we adding perturbations? Because we still want good stability around the areas without taking away all the good stuff. If you're a tendon-driven hip dom, you've got a lot of really great attributes, and we need to support it. We need to understand how to support that. So, and then are we looking at, are we doing enough? Are we doing enough for everyone? And we're looking at motor control. So, have we got the ability to control our movement? Are we doing the right muscle type training? So again, something that you go along the strength speed continuum. Where do you sit on there? If you're at one end, you need to be training the other end. If you're at that end, you need to be training that end. If it's 60-40 split, whatever it is, make sure we're doing the right one there. And are we helping the bones as we're developing? We need to have some sort of contact times with the floor, so the bones get hardened up. So as well as sort of things like jumping, skipping, to keep bowling will actually help harden the bone up, make it more robust, and then supporting it with good nutrition. Really important as well. Are we getting the good foods in? Are we getting enough sunlight in? Vitamin D, vitamin C, all those sorts of things. Magnesium, potassium, all things that go into helping the body and overall helping you. So hopefully that makes sense. So to summarize, the higher degree at the angle of the hip at back foot contact, obviously it's with higher incidence, but then we need to look at what happens after that. If the body recovers well, like we said, is the heel up at back foot contact, good pre-turn, with the knee doms and the pelvis and thoracic, a fairly square ball release, then we're happy. Okay, we know as long as we've done the right things around training, and we know they've got good motor control, they've got good power, good stability, that you're going to be okay. So hopefully that's made some sort of sense. As always, any questions, please shout. But it's just trying to help you understand the things that we always look into and the things that we're doing to try and keep you on the park. Okay? Speak soon.